Hey everyone, welcome to topic 2. This is where I am going to go over some of the stuff from topic 2. So what I need you guys to do is the topic 2 blank notes that I did upload to Google Classroom. You can use the PowerPoint or you can use my tutorial to go through and help you fill it out. Okay, so first thing is sex determination. So chromosomal or genetic sex is determined at fertilization. Okay, so when we go to our next unit, which is our genetics unit, we're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of genetics, but what we need to look at is the females have two X chromosomes and a male has an X and a Y. So when we look at the gametes, so gametes in this case, these would be eggs, okay, and down here would be sperm. So when we look at a female, the female gametes will only have an X chromosome, where the males will produce an X or a Y. So sometimes when, you've probably heard of this before, is it's actually the males that are going to determine the sex of the offspring. Okay, so when we look at it here, if I had a female egg, which is an X, and a sperm that has an X, the offspring is going to have two X's, which indicates that genetically it is female. When we look down in this situation, I have a sperm that is a Y, and I have a egg, which is an X, which genetically will produce a male, because they have an X and a Y. Okay, so just please remember that it's determined at fertilization. Fertilization is actually in topic 3, but that's where your egg and your sperm unite. Okay. However, the anatomic sex is not determined until about the 7th week of development. So this is referring to if the physical male reproductive structures are going to be formed or if female. So we're looking at, is there a penis produced, are there testes produced, etc. So at 7 weeks, genes contained within the short arm of the Y chromosome encode the secretion of testosterone. Okay, so we need to understand that that Y chromosome is linked to the production of testosterone, which causes the embryo to start to differentiate. This is important. Okay, so even though genetically it already has an X and a Y, this is where our hormones are going to start to play. So early on, at 7 weeks, if the Y chromosome is present, it's going to start producing testosterone. Okay, if there is no Y chromosome, therefore there will be no testosterone produced. Therefore, the embryo will continue to develop as a female. So if I ask you anything related to the actual sex differentiation, we have to relate it to the Y chromosome and the Y chromosome and its ability to produce that testosterone. Okay, so in our last tutorial, I did review some of the sex hormones, but I will go through this fairly quickly. But like in males, puberty begins with the hypothalamus, triggers the release of LH and FSH from the pituitary. However, in females, a little more specific, FSH stimulates the development of the female sex organs as well as the follicle development. The follicle will then in turn produce estrogen. This is important for us to be able to make the connection between FSH and our estrogen. LH will trigger the ovulation. Once again, guys, if you do need more information about your hormones, the other tutorial does review the hormones in quite a bit of detail. Okay? So, this video here, it is embedded. I'm not going to show you this in this tutorial, but this is a very important video for you to go watch because it's going to go through the process of the menstrual cycle, and it's probably one of the best videos in the reproduction unit. Okay, so the menstrual cycle. When we look at the menstrual cycle, so a female will go through a menstrual cycle once every 28 days. A approximately. So a lot of the times in biology we do approximations. We're not saying that every single female will have a menstrual cycle. Their menstrual cycle is 28 days long, but when we look at it, we base it on that average. Okay, so the first phase of the menstrual cycle is classified during days 0 to 7. We will need to remember that timeline, but this is categorized as the flow phase. This is going to mark the beginning of the cycle. This is where your shedding of the endometrium is going to happen. So if implantation did not occur during the last cycle, the endometrium is no longer required. So this is where a female will physically shed that inner lining. Hormone levels will also be at their lowest. So when we categorize the flow phase, this is typically where a female will be on their period because they are shedding out that endometrium. On to the next phase, your follicular phase. So this is days 7 to 14. This is where our hormones will start to change and regulate a little differently. So GnRH stimulates the release of FSH. Now, if you guys remember what FSH does, is that if you go back to our last tutorial, is that FSH is going to turn it, the follicle into a mature egg. Okay, so that's important for us to remember, is why FSH is there. Well, FSH is going to be increasing because they want that egg to be able to mature. As the follicle develops, estrogen is also secreted, promoting the development of the endometrium. So this is why in our last tutorial I said it was really important for us to know our hormones, because we need to understand why hormone levels rise at certain times in this 28-day menstrual cycle. So because estrogen levels are rising, it's going to inhibit the release of FSH from the pituitary. So this goes back to our endocrine, and we talk about the negative feedback loops, that when something's produced, that is going to allow that whole feedback loop to turn off. Your ovulatory phase. So this occurs just on day 14. This is where estrogen is going to trigger a sharp increase in LH, which signals the release of the mature ovum from the follicle. So this is where that mature egg is going to be released into the fallopian tube. Now, once this occurs, estrogen levels will begin to decline. So on our next slide, we are going to talk about looking at these hormones graphically, but because estrogen has done its job, it now can start to decrease. And the follicle will then form the corpus luteum, which will then lead us into the luteal phase, which is days 14 through 28. So once the corpus luteum forms, it begins to secrete estrogen and progesterone. And we know that progesterone is going to come from our corpus luteum. So estrogen will continue to promote the development of the endometrial lining. Progesterone plays an important role in prepping the uterus for the embryo. Like estrogen, it stimulates the development of the endometrium. It also inhibits LH, preventing further ovulation and firming the cervix. So this, you guys, is important because we want to be able to prepare that endometrium if implantation occurs. So once the egg is released at day 14, it's going to flow through the fallopian tube. And in the fallopian tube, if it does fertilize, that's where that is going to occur. And once we go into our next section, into topic 3, we're going to talk about where it implants, etc. But for right now, we need to understand that our endometrial lining is very, very important, because that needs to be there in this phase in order for implantation to happen. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum degenerates and the hormone secretion stops, causing the endometrial lining to be shed, which is going to bring us back to the beginning of this 28-day cycle. And this is where the female will start their period again. Okay, so this next slide is just showing you graphically a few different things. So at the very top here, we have our LH and our FSH. So when we look at this, your FSH is in blue. FSH does not go very high, but it still rises enough in order to do its job. Okay, same thing with LH. You can see LH spiking, and if we look down here, your timing is down here at day 14. So my expectation, and we do have an assignment on this, is understanding why. Why would FSH increase here and why would LH increase? And if we go back to the other tutorial and we go back and review our hormones, it's going to start to make sense why these hormones need to be elevated and then decreased at certain times. When we look here, we have our developing follicles. Ovulation is going to occur at day 14. And then we have the production of the corpus luteum. And this is where we can start to make our connections, is that our corpus luteum is responsible for progesterone production, which when we look here, we do not see a spike in progesterone until the second half of the menstrual cycle. Why does that occur? Well, where does progesterone come from? Progesterone is going to come from the corpus luteum, and we don't even have a corpus luteum available until after this 14-day ovulation. Okay, so at the very bottom here, change colors. Okay, we are looking at the actual endometrium. So I know it says uterine cycle, but that's referring to the endometrium lining. Because we talk about the endometrium thickening, it's going to shed, etc. So this is what this is representing here. So if we look here during our flow phase, we can see that the endometrium is becoming thin. This is because it's shedding. So this is part of the flow phase where a female will physically shed their endometrium because implantation did not occur. As we move forward through the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase, we can notice that the endometrium is going to start to thicken. Because if ovulation is going to occur, it's going to occur within this time frame. And if implantation occurs in this uterine wall, okay, in the endometrium, that is where we will start to look at in topic 3 that your endometrium is going to stay because it's eventually going to turn into that pathway between a fetus and mom, which will eventually turn into our placenta. Okay, so that is a basic introduction to the menstrual cycle. Like I said, please watch that YouTube video that I did post about the menstrual cycle because that'll clarify a lot of things. This graph I'm going to go over in another tutorial a little bit more in detail, but thanks for tuning in, guys. Till next time.